As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's edition of Nation Watch, Sunday 7th May 2023. Nation Watch is a production of the People's National Congress Reform, and we're coming to you from our studios at Congress Place, Sophia. Today we'll be discussing public security, and we have the best guest with whom to have such a conversation, former Minister of Public Security himself and leader of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Khemraj Ramjattan, Member of Parliament. Welcome, Mr. Ramjattan.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the description of best, although I feel that there was one person who was better and knew it all, our President, David Arthur Granger.
I'm sure he must be feeling a bit uncomfortable now with the current situation in terms of public security in Guyana, as most citizens are. I want to start with this court decision, the Paul Slow versus Police Service Commission decision, because I believe it has a lot of bearing on what's happening in terms of policing, especially the senior level. The court ruled that President Ali was in violation of the Constitution when he suspended the chair, Paul Slow, and commissioners of the Police Service Commission. There's speculation out there about what can be triggered in terms of impeachment and all that, but specifically this violation and its impact on the security sector in Guyana. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it has created, obviously, a tremendous amount of confusion, and it has created a lot of resentment and disenchantment of those who, under the Paul Slow Commission, ought to have been promoted. The promotions of which were not as a result of the PPP government and President Irfan Ali indicating that he is not going to abide by those promotions. I want to feel that kind of a resentment and disenchantment has affected the professionalism of the police force to the extent whereby you're not going to get 100%. The Findlay Commission, whose names were promoted, we will have, a kind of difficulty getting things done, especially when you had these persons under the Paul Slow Commission not being promoted. There is nothing that creates that kind of difficulty for a professional force like the institution of security, the police force. It is very, very difficult. And people would say, but look what has happened. We were promoted and then not promoted, and then these persons were promoted, and our court order has been granted to the effect that we ought to have been promoted. And it leaves a lot of bitterness in the mouths of so many people now, because you have two sets of people who are going to be vexed about the situation. And it will do the police force no good. And it is important that we understand that that is the impact. Professionalism and a kind of a massive confusion and resentment is going to prevail. And that obviously will affect the work. And quite frankly, the work has been affected. The perception is that policemen are not doing their work. Lots of complaints are coming in against the Guyana police force. And so there is already an impact in relation to that matter. And what do you do to correct it? It's going to be difficult. How do you correct a situation like that? You have a scenario whereby you can't now go, having already promoted all those who were named under the Findlay Commission. You just can't go now, even though the court has ordered that it is unconstitutional. I'm talking about the practicalities of it. How do you go now and say, hey, the court has ruled and we have to now take you down back to the original position. And we have to now go and put up the names that Paul Slow had put up. It is going to have tremendous challenges. And that is the difficulty I feel that we have here. How do you begin to countenance such a situation? But that is what we have. And I believe that what should happen is to promote all of them, to the extent of having those that were said to be promoted by the Paul Slow, also they should be promoted now. And that can solve the situation. I don't see any other way out, because it is going to bring bad blood, plenty bad blood, amongst the ranks and the officers themselves.
You have been a parliamentarian for more than 30 years, one of the longest serving in Guyana's National Assembly. Have you any recollection of any constitutional violation of this nature that impacts or potentially impacts the public security sector in Guyana? And do you have any recollection of a junior police officer, a police officer who is junior to another being given the assignment of commissioner of police over his senior, as in the case of Mr. Hicken, who was a substantive assistant commissioner, and Mr. Williams, who is a substantive deputy commissioner, with Mr. Hicken being placed in the seat of the commissioner? Have you ever seen occurrences like these before?
I haven't seen. I know normally they go by seniority, and that is how more or less it was supposed to be done. I recall whereby we had, and I would like to be frank here, that we had 5 deputy commissioners. Ram Narayan was the most senior, and the past president, Ranger, did select Leslie James over and above Ram Narayan. He gave us reasons in cabinet as to why he did that. But remember, if the PPP don't like a certain deputy commissioner, the appointment of commissioner is more or less a presidential appointment.
It is, but there's a difference between someone who's performing the functions of commissioner and someone who's appointed substantively. I think there's a difference between
that is where this one was a first, in my opinion. And I think Paul Williams was the most senior one.
Yes.
Paul was deputy commissioner.
Is
deputy commissioner, and ought to have been if it was in a process of seniority. But of course, the president decided otherwise. And all of that helps to, cause the confusion in these institutions that have their hierarchies in such a regimented form. And so it can bring the difficulties. I rather suspect that will add, because Paul Williams would have his set of people that will support him. And there it is, that you have Mr. Hicken will have his set of people. And of course, the president supported him well. Paul will just have to say, well, I'll remain deputy commissioner. It's a difficult choice.
Someone once said, Mr. Ramjattan, that there are 3 types of lies. Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah.
We have been regaled with statistics from the Guyana Police Force, which, by the way, has a civilian communications outfit as opposed to the usual police communications outfit. The last reports that I recall would have been around November 16th in the Guyana Chronicle, November 16, 2022, which said that serious crimes were down by 19%. And an earlier one in March of the same year, last year, where serious crimes were down 18%. There's a perception by a large majority of Guyanese citizens that these statistics make no sense given the realities that Guyanese live in day after day. What's the basis for these stats coming out? How do they do it, and do they reflect the reality?
I doubt it. I doubt it. What has happened recently is that a lot of people do not report that they have been robbed. You get some, I know of some West Demerarans that came to Starbuck Market there. They get robbed. I mean, I was just around the corner going into the court because my office is now in Hatfield Street. And they were telling me, and I said, well, go to Brigham and report. They're going to waste time and report, man. They gone with me. They have about $25,000, $30,000 in their pocket, and they haven't reported. Now, if you got plenty people who know that it is such a inconvenience to report the matter, because when you go to the police station, you got to give a statement. It takes a long time. They can miss their business, what they came forth in Georgetown and so on. It is not reported. And so they go now and they tell their West Demararan family members, friends, neighbors that a bigger rob at Georgetown and so on. The perception becomes, well, that is a reality. All over, the people will talk about crime in Georgetown because these two fellas get robbed. But the statistics there are not in the equation to ensure that you have a profoundly accurate quantity of crimes occurring. And so then, you're going to get the statistics telling you wrong. But then there might also be deliberate statistical manipulation and all that, and certain disinformation, and to cut it down and say, well, this one has been solved and so on. I know that when I left as public security minister, we were getting statistics, some of which I did question, because I myself wanted to know in certain divisions how this thing has gone up like that, certain other divisions where it is. And so you are trying as best to professionalize the police force that during the PVP era prior to 2015 was somewhat very, negative in its relation to public perception. Even Silal Prasad told me that one of the first things that we should now do in the ministry is to ensure that the public has a better perception of the professionalism of the police. And I tried as best as possible. You try to cut down the complaints by virtue of ensuring that every one of them will be heard by the Office of Professional Responsibility or the Police Complaints Authority. And when people know that they are going to now have complaints against them, that has a deterring effect in doing wrong things. When also you wanted the statistical section and the strategic department now that Russell Coombe had come in the country under the British Security Sector Reform Program, we then indicated to him to personally have certain talks with the leadership of the police force to ensure that we get a professional job even with the statistics. And I thought that improved. But since Russell Coombe has gone and the British Security Sector Reform came up with all the consultancies and then the recommendations, we were supposed to have something called a change board that were supposed to implement all those recommendations. I understand now that nothing has happened. Everything has collapsed. The PPP doesn't want that, and we are not in any position to scrutinize it, because when you ask the questions in Parliament, you can't get answers. And secondly, and it's an important point I wish to bring here, we have a Parliamentary Security Sector Committee, which came about around the 2002 period in the constitutional reform process. A brand new committee in which it will be made up of a majority government set of people and a minority of PVP, PNC, APNU, AFC people. And we then did our first meeting in 2020, formed the committee, and never thereafter, for the last 3 years, have we gotten any other meeting convened by the Minister of Public Security, Home Affairs now, Ben. Whereas in our term in office, everything that the then PPP in opposition wanted to get, they could have asked. As soon as they asked, I convened a public security sector committee meeting of the parliamentary committee, and they demanded that Silal Prasad come. And Silal Prasad came, and they cross-examined him about almost everything about the police force. They did the same thing with Courtney Samuels from the prisons, and Fire Chief Gentle, and all the programs for the next 5 years and so on. And they were ready to call them at any other stage. They heard that the police stations were in bad shape in the interior. Well, I said it's because of the PPP. 23 all the years you've been in there. We had to find money to get airplane costs and go into the interior, check out some of these.
As a committee.
As a committee. And we did all of that. A lot of work was done. And then based on the citizen security report, monies and so on, we started now implementing better police station, getting 8 TVs and so on for them, and a whole host of things as a result of some of the reports that came out of that parliamentary sector committee. But what you got now? Benin called that thing for the last 3 years after the setting up of the committee. So the scrutiny that an opposition can bring to a ministry and how the ministry is doing its work has all now been absent completely as a result of the dysfunction or non-function of that Parliamentary Security Committee.
I'm going to bring you back to the Parliamentary Security Sector Committee a little later on. But here's a question I have for you with regard to how we were flowing a minute ago. Now, guns. Mm-hmm. We have seen reports in the media within recent weeks and perhaps months. We had a situation where a young licensed firearm holder shot his spouse in a car. We had situations with people pulling gun all over the place at Starbucks. In Linden, someone pulled a gun allegedly and threatened the regional chairman of Region 10, threatened his life and so on. It appears as though guns are in the wrong hands, or at least in the hands of some irresponsible people. It might be a minority, and I hope it is. There have been reports on the Paul Slow show, speaking out against corruption and so on, that there are allegations of gun running transactions through the legitimate process. I do not know anything about it, but I heard the program and the to and fro conversation. You yourself are being accused of issuing gun licenses and all sorts of nonsense, when in fact, in an earlier conversation, you made it clear that in 2019, the lowest number of licenses ever issued in this country in a year would have been in 2019. 2020. Comment, please, Mr. Ramjattan, on the increasing number of reports with respect to guns and
well, it could be
licensing
via 2 methods. One is that a lot of the illegal arms and ammunition coming through the Brazilian border and the Venezuelan border, and probably Suriname too, are in the hands of unlicensed people. And they're using it for purposes of showing off and going and do the wickedness and robbing and pulling it at pleasure. The second one is that it could very well be that they are licensed, and that licensing process that I left very much intact in the department there must have gone total haywire. Okay? I remember at the very end, and I want to bring this point out, President Granger indicated to each of his cabinet members when elections was to be held in 2020 now, that he wants us to do what is called the quinquennial report, that is the 5-year report, 2015 to 2020, in relation to all matters within our individual ministries. So Office of the President, Ministry of whatever, and my ministry, Public Security, and so on. And I had to give a complete report, which report also was there for the new minister, who would have been whatever the results is that we lost it. And of course, we now have Ben there. So he would have seen what the exact things that we did in relation to this. And every statistic as to firearms approved and disapproved, tint licenses granted, and all of that is here. And we compare the previous 4 years of the previous government. So you can see how much was approved. Like in 2011, 188 was approved. That is a 99%. Just 0.5% was disapproved from the applicants, and so on. And then when you come to 2015, the majority of that time, it starts coming down to 41% and 27% approval rates, and so on. And the figures are far smaller than what used to happen. So all this allegation against me and so on. And I had a board, the board made up of Dr. Bertie Sukai and there's a doctor there, 2 doctors, because Walter Lawrence wanted another doctor to be in it, and we put that other doctor and the regular other members. And I did not change the board from the PPP appointed board. I did not change it except to put an additional doctor. And that was what we granted. In the year 2020, when Mr. Ben had quite a lot to say about how I granted 67% without the firearm board approval, because indeed I wanted everybody to be approved by the. Indeed, in that year, by the time I left government, 37 people were approved. And he goes to the press, Ben, 69% of that 37 were not approved by the board. And that is true. But the board could not meet because in 2020 we had the COVID. And the board generally meets in a room downstairs in the ministry. And so I realized that I had to grant these firearm license. I could, but you could have a recommendation from the board. And I decided, fine, I could use that. I got the Attorney General, Basil Williams. Could I grant it? I read the law, I could grant, and I granted the 37, 22 of them. The trouble is, I don't know what is happening there. And under my regime, the opposition could have come to see the names and everything about every one of these applicants that were approved. And whether the firearm board approved it or not. That was the scrutiny, because at the parliamentary level, they could call for it. Like say in the year 2018, 65 people were approved, right? Out of 228, 65, just at 28%. And some of them were saying that, we have to check on this. Well, please check. I got a firearm board. Let's have a meeting at the Public Security Sector Committee, and you will get all the names of the people who were granted, and you could call Mr. Bertie Sukai. And Bertie Sukai will say, yes, we approved of this man. And the commissioner approved of him. And the commander of the division approved of him. You understand? And you had that scrutiny. The trouble now, they ain't functioning. And you got this thing now where they're going to want it. And this is the disinformation, the misinformation, the character assassination that the PPP always does with its opponents. Their lies. And all of these things could not now be scrutinized. So when you see, as you rightly asked me the question there just now, well, what's happening there? I, as the opposition spokesperson on public security, do not know, because Mr. Ben would not call up the public security meetings. He's chairman, he has to convene it. And under the rules, it must be chaired by him. And so it is a blank, and you never know what is happening. And in view of all that has happened now with the PS, because these things also got to pass through the PS, as records and so on. Look at what happened to the PS.
That's where I am heading now in this conversation. Viewers, you watching Nation Watch. It's Sunday, 7th May 2023. My guest is former Public Security Minister, Mr. Khemraj Ramjattan, who's also leader of the Alliance for Change. Mr. Ramjattan, this permanent Secretary, Ministry of Home Affairs, it's causing disquiet, discomfort to many in Guyana to know that our Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Home Affairs was intercepted in the United States, was arrested, was reportedly handcuffed, questioned, her passport taken, and visa cancelled. And it's also reported that her cell phone, government-issued cell phone, was confiscated. So there's a cloud hanging over this individual, this very important public servant.
That's right.
And the Parliamentary Security Sector Committee does not meet. Can the opposition petition for a meeting of the Parliamentary Security Sector Committee for this very important matter of the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Home Affairs to be called before this committee and interviewed?
And cross-examined.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Can you call for that meeting? Can you demand?
I can write to the Honorable Minister, Ben, asking for that and let the agenda item be singularly that one. If I do that, Ben not going to agree, and even when he agrees, he's going to say the agenda item must not have that one and things like that. So they have their methods. So many things I've constantly asked him, when you're going to convene a meeting of the public security sector reform. No, leave it like that, and that's the end of the matter. I mean, if we petition, it is myself, Mr. Chandan, and somebody else who make up the 3 members there, and I think they got 4, or it's 4 and 5. So we will have the petition signed up by the 4, calling for the meeting. And I doubt whether, but every budget time I mention these things, every time Ben gets up, I sometimes heckle him, why you don't convene the meeting? No. And I think he has gotten instructions from some of the bigger boys. Don't convene that meeting. Because, and that is where we, only the other night, remember, we were talking to some of the congressmen and senators, and we were telling them about these things. They're scared. And this Public Security Sector Committee of Parliament is supposed to be a confidential kind of a body, so that when we are supposed to be responsible enough that when we get the information, we cross-examine and so on, we can have these things in camera.
Yes.
But we will get to know, so the minister will know that this is wrong thing going on inside of his ministry by virtue of the opposition cross-examining the PS or the commissioner of police or the fire chief or the prison director. You know what I mean? So it is something that is helpful. But this government do not want scrutiny. Scrutiny and accountability is what they hate completely. And so I feel that, oh yes, I could do a petition. I could do that on Wednesday when we get Parliament and ask them. But you rest assured it ain't going anywhere.
But why would the Minister of Home Affairs and particularly the President of the Republic protect, shelter the Permanent Secretary from scrutiny? Why?
Because I believe that there might be underlying irregularities and probably criminalities that might be put to the public, and that could do have devastating repercussions to his administration. Because that is what they did, you know. Apart from making dysfunctional this parliamentary committee that scrutinizes, they took away an extraordinarily competent lady in Daniela McCalman, who got public management master's degree and a set of other degrees and so on, and was there as the substantive PS. Very professional. And she arose out of the ranks from the PDP 23 years, you know. It is not as if we put her there. She was the deputy to Miss Johnson. And then she became a Miss Johnson. I think, I hope I get the names right. Then she became the substantive. And they just pushed her aside and put this woman there, May Thomas, who does not know so many things about the public security. And it is not as if she was going to have difficulties. They take this from the substantive position holder and they put her somewhere in the juvenile holding center in some desk. They shelved her.
But it's a very, very sensitive ministry. It deals with, among other things, immigration, passport issuance, law enforcement, prison maintenance and fire protection and prevention investigation, CANU, the narcotics investigations, the whole business of extradition requests from friendly countries.
That's correct.
And surveillance. There are CCTV cameras all over the place, and this ministry manages the CCTV cameras and access.
That's right.
And there are allegations floating on social media that someone connected to the permanent secretary may have been given a device that can access these cameras and can do their own independent surveillance, independent of the structured ministry arrangements and so on. So this ministry is so very sensitive that this matter needs to be urgently addressed.
Yeah, look, it all calls for leadership. When you start hearing, like I had heard, some of the policemen, when I got into office, are corrupt. And I knew these policemen, officers and so on. And I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. But I made it a point that please bring the complaints and the complaints will be heard. I want scrutiny because I could be wrong about that being a good cop when he's a rogue element. And we got to get rid of rogue elements. As a matter of fact, I got rid of about 6 of them.
Wow.
Yes. And that is what you got to do if you want to establish an institution of true professionals, or getting there by a process of some time and training and all of that. But when you now do not have that kind of leadership of wanting the opposition to bring the questions, whether that thing happening inside the ministry there, whether this thing happening within the ministry there, you are going to block scrutiny, and those things might very well be happening. And you, because you block it,
You're complicit.
you kind of indirectly or vicariously complicit. You don't, good leadership inside of an institution like that, you bring it and let's hear what the people are saying. And look, officer, you don't tell me that they're lying on you. Let me just hear what they got to say. Pass it to the OPR. And we had a good OPR head that, I forget the name now, former Macanal. And then pass it to the former chancellor, Police Complaints Authority. Let him, and then I think the other one was Mr. Ramlal. Yeah, because immediately after he gone off, we put Ramlal there. And so you get that kind of scrutiny. But today, I don't know if you get any of these scrutiny. And the most important one is coming from that public security sector parliamentary committee. And that is why we're not going to be in any position to know. And you know what it also does? Is like, okay, we're hearing now that this PS might have somebody close to her knowing all the images on the thing. It wipes away unenlightened speculation. For all you know, that could be a lie.
It could very well be a lie.
It could very well be a lie. How do you get it off the table as a lie? By going in and doing the parliamentary committee work that then brings her there, and she explains it that is not the case or whatever it is, and so that you can have these things now being understood properly, and also
becoming public records.
Becoming public records. Well, it is to a certain extent. Some of the records there can't be public. It's in camera, some of the sessions and so on. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is, at least we in the opposition will know. And when we bring it out, the minister will then get to know. Yeah. And the minister can go and say, hold on a minute. This thing, like, it got some merits about it, boss. This thing, hold on. And then he can go and do his thing with the PS, if you understand what I mean. Yeah. And if he's a truly professional, good leader, you'll make sure that if there is any sprinkling of suspicion or iota of suspicion, you knock her off.
Quick final question on this subject, Mr. Ramjattan. I put a question to Mr. Aubrey Norton, Leader of the Opposition, right here last Sunday. The Ministry of Home Affairs, apart from being as important as it is, has been, under the People's Progressive Party, attracting some really negative attention. Minister Khemraj had his U.S. visa revoked when he served as Minister of Home Affairs. Mr. Henry Green, who was Commissioner at the time, Commissioner of Police, he had his United States visa revoked. We have now the Permanent Secretary who had her visa revoked, and the Permanent Secretary is corporate equivalent of Chief Executive Officer. And there are speculations that all may not be well with the subject minister's visa. He has made it public that it really didn't matter whether he lost it or not. However, the issue is not the person, it is the Office of Minister of Home Affairs of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. It speaks to the image of our country abroad with friendly countries. It speaks to the morale of all those agencies and their operatives superintended by this office. What are your thoughts on the kind of things that have been happening under the People's Progressive Party at the Ministry of Home Affairs?
Well, it is not as if I find it unexpected. The PPP, when it comes to security issues, have never really commandeered properly. There was absolutely, since the time of, I used to be very critical of Laurie Lewis, as you know.
Yes.
And even after Laurie changed, we had whosoever else, I still believe that the professionalism was not built into the thing by virtue of the various PPP administrations, from Chetty to Janet to Jagdeo and then to Donald Ramjattan.
Don't forget the brother Sam, huh?
Well, Sam was there just
In 9 months.
Yeah, he could not have done much.
Yeah.
But they fear somehow, and this is what motivated them to be so suspicious of what was going on. They feared professionalism because they feel that if the police force behave professionally, they might not take their instructions and you're going to have problems. Just like what the truly professional fellow that I find over the years was that St. Paul Slope. Remember when Khemraj ordered him to do so, and he said he's not going to. That was a professional fella.
Yes. And Jagdeo ordered him.
And that's
well.
right.
Yeah.
You got all the problems.
Yeah.
And that is why we brought him back as chairman of the Police Service Commission, because we know that he knows. But they don't want that. They want our kind of people who probably don't know. And that is exactly what you get with the May Thomas. And to that extent then, it is inherent in the DNA of the PPP of not wanting true professionalism, to the extent whereby they're going to put in all these people to run these institutions, and we're not going to get the best of it.
The clock is running. I have 2 major issues to discuss in the next, 20 minutes or so, maximum. The National Intelligence and Security Agency. We know that this agency existed prior to 2015. We know it continued to exist through 2015, 2020.
2017, we started.
Yeah.
2 years, it wasn't there, really.
Yeah. Now there is the legislation that is really, really controversial. It is the kind of legislation that gives some wide sweeping powers to whoever will be head of that agency, and it gives the president exclusive control over this agency, including the appointment of the chair, the head and deputy, without any consultative process, be it parliamentary or with the leader of the opposition. It is a bit of legislation that seeks to allow operatives to intrude on people's privacy and people's rights in some instances. Tell us a bit more about this this National Intelligence Security Agency bill?
Well, in all fairness, we had a system whereby this National Security Committee was there. They had certain infrastructure down the road there, up the road here, and but it was an administrative kind of arrangement under the prerogative of the president. And as far as I know, we used to report the head of the police force, the head of the fire department, the head of the various heads, Kanu head and so on, army head, Mark Phillips used to be there, and report to us, namely the committee that comprises of them and the president, the prime minister, and a couple of others, ministers. And they would then make sure that they gave us updates as to what is happening in and around the country on matters national security and public security. So if the syndicatos are doing mischief in Region 1, or a Kanu fellow is corrupt and doing things with certain cocaine and so on, we will get to know because that's inside information. And then, because our cabinet meeting had to start at 10 o'clock, we did this meeting now at 8 to 10. And we then told the cabinet members, I used to be the person in charge, and I would brief the cabinet based on that set of information that's told. What I see here in this legislation now is a lot more than that kind of administrative arrangement. It is empowering people to spy, use surveillance equipment. Although I must say that I understand that the National Security Committee had certain pieces of equipment. But what we have here now, and it comes back to the point that I earlier made, that the PPP government always was suspicious of the head of the army, the head of the police force, notwithstanding it might be their supporters and appointee. They still feel that they want a third body to deal with. And that is why 2 budgets ago, they wanted to set up a regional security system so that they will have their players in all the regions and so on, who are going to bring to them information on the ground and so on. It couldn't get off the ground. Because they still suspect this police force and this army and so on, they now create this thing legislatively, in my opinion, because they could now name the director and they could name a deputy director. Who really will get powers? That is the director, like a commissioner of police, like army head. And so they're going to appoint thereby whosoever he is, and let that fella literally tell them now, everything okay? This is it. Look, Mr. Ramjattan is doing a protest demonstration down the road, or is preparing for something in quarantine and whatever and so on. So they will get information. They're going to tap into your phone, tap into. Look, I am glad that it has gone to the select committee. I am glad to the extent then that they're going to listen to the opposition voices. And herein, the opposition voices will not only be APNU AFC, it will have to be members of civil society who can come in, the Human Rights Association and so on, who will be asked to bring in recommendations, and so that we can clarify this thing. Indeed, in other parts of the Commonwealth, there are legislation of similar ilk. We want to do the comparisons and so on. But knowing this PPP, look, I am very suspicious as to what they're going to use the director and the deputy director to do. And hopefully we'll have professionalism rather than just loyalty to the PPP.
Well, it's interesting that you have the police special branch, which is a surveillance special operations setup. You have the military criminal intelligence, MSID.
That's right.
You have, this is an agency to watch those 2 watchers. But you in 2007, you coined a term, control freakism. How do you relate control freakism to the National Intelligence Security Agency bill? And
it applies all 4s. being control freaks is the reason why they want to bring this legislation. The PPP does not understand that it must act on trust and trust the institutions that are already legislated for. The PPP has always been like that. I mean, I was such a PPPite, and they didn't trust me simply because you questioned them, and they kick you behind out from the party. So they don't trust anybody who is completely an acolyte, you know, or a sycophant, and so on. The minute you question them, you're in trouble, and they'll get rid of you.
You spoke of the institutions. Guyana Elections Commission is an institution required to do certain constitutional functions. One area of remit is to issue national identification cards. You now have an agency, we don't know which, will be issuing electronic identification cards. Quickly, is there a connect between the electronic ID cards and the National Intelligence Security Agency function futuristically along the lines of control freakism?
Hello, certainly. You will have the director and the deputy director and all his staff members, along with certain elements that are loyal or they feel loyal to him from the police force and the army, all coming as a conglomerate to ensure that what they want in relation to the electronic ID system, they will get. And the PPP is scared, always will be scared, as to an opposition getting back into government. And they don't like that. It is getting very close now. A couple of thousand votes are the difference. And they feel that they must put these adjuncts of power and paraphernalia and other things that in place so that they could make the advantage in their favor. And that is what they're going to do.
In the remaining 9 minutes or so, Mr. Ramjattan, let's discuss very quickly this matter of Justice Kissoon's ruling.
Oh, yeah.
Justice Kissoon's ruling, this is an aside from public security, but a matter of grave importance to our country.
It's a matter of national security?
It is. There's a particular bit I wanted to look at here for a second.
That's in the judgment?
Yeah. He said that that the Guyana Environmental Agency was in breach of the oil spill insurance provisions. And he ordered that Exxon must furnish the Guyanese authorities with a liability agreement from insurance, from an insurance company by June 10th. Now, the general understanding is that the judge's rulings are based on the content of the agreement.
That's correct.
But here it is that the Attorney General of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana has decided he's going to appeal this judgment. How sensible is that decision, given the fact that the judge is ordering that these things in the agreement be complied with?
You want me to categorize how sensible it is? I think that it is unfathomable senility. That's the word I can, at this stage, create in describing how you can allow a judgment of that nature, very much in your interest, against Exxon, to go and now decide that I'm going to appeal it on business grounds. It is hopelessly unpatriotic. It is most anti-national. And it shows how, from a situation where the opposition PPP, now government PPP, had said that it was the most rottenest of contracts, and Exxon, such a bad company, and so on. And they today are strange bedfellows, almost in an incestuous relationship. And that is how I will describe it. Because look, this judge is giving you an opening to ensure that you and your CARICOM and your Venezuelan citizens, all brothers and sisters in this part, will not suffer from an oil spill that cannot then be taken care of. That is what the judge is doing. And the judge did it primarily on a set of facts based on the contractual terms and interpreting the law, which basically is a function of the judge. Why are you now going to argue against that? If Exxon wants, let Exxon go and do that. But it shows that this government and Exxon have become very strange bedfellows.
But I'm hearing you suggesting that Mr. Nandlal, in appealing, might be doing what Exxon is required to do. Is the government of Guyana a servant of an investor now? Is that...
No, well, it is not. It is absolutely not. And that is why I'm saying they are at the service of Exxon. Because as I have said in another press conference, they want Exxon to do a lot of things for them and their support bases. And you got to understand this, because if you're a reader of how the imperialist and transnational companies work, they now can say, all right, well, you're going to appeal the case for us and whatever. And the deal is that you want a stadium at Palmyra? I can give you a stadium at Palmyra. $3 billion. It can't another $3 billion, $30 billion. Okay, it's all right. Give you that. You want us to give the Amerindians some money? Oh, yes, no problem. And that is what, because they're so scared of the elections on a legitimate basis getting so close. So they have worked out, in my opinion, and it is my opinion based on all the facts that I see at a political level, a Faustian deal. Oh, we're going to make sure that you get the best deal here. You could flare. You could throw the water and dump them inside of the ocean, all the toxic water that Vince Adams is talking about. You don't have to bother with the $214 million IHS market report that says you expanded the amount of money. We're going to hide that from the PU and the public and the opposition. And so we are there. And so they tell them in return, you set up another, we're going to want a big stadium in Linden, and you're going to get it. And this is the quid pro quo. It is damning. And that which is so unpatriotic for our Attorney General to go and take up the cause for Exxon has no good about it. It has no national interest about it. It is anti-national and it is unpatriotic. Quite frankly, it's immoral.
The Environmental Protection Agency has been giving approval for various operations to take off without environmental impact assessment studies. Mm-hmm. This ruling, does it have potential for, as precedent, potential for forcing the hand of the Environmental Protection Agency to do otherwise than it's doing right now in terms of its approval? And is it one of the things that Mr. Nandlal may be very fearful about, that all the EIAs that have not been done,
that have been waived,
can now come back into play?
Oh yes, this has tremendous ramifications. This precedent is a landmark precedent, and I am so proud of that, Judge Sandil Kissoon, good friend of mine. And it is important to understand the implications of a precedent like that. In the public's interest now, citizens who are taxpayers and who have locus standi could issue proceedings against the waivers that have occurred. I think there are litigation already in the courts concerning the waiving of environmental impact assessments for the gas to shore base and all that. But it does go to show how at that branch of government called the judiciary, you can have brilliant analyses done, and the judge was pretty brilliant here, in his analysis, stating that this is what you got to do. And I rather suspect the judge, being a Guyanese citizen, understands the nature of waiving. You create a body. I remember myself and Mr. Hoyt agreeing with this piece of legislation. We gave speeches. I was in the PPP then, and Mr. Hoyt was heading, and we all agreed that we have to create a body, because we as parliamentarians don't have the knowledge as to these environmental issues and so on. And the environmental issues around that time, I think it's about 15 years ago, were now getting big on Guyana. And we passed that law. What is the use of having the bloody law there and there is no substance to it, because the EPA head and all of that now come to say that we're going to waive it. We're going to waive it. Waive these major development, these major projects. That was especially what it was created for, the EPA, to give every piece of analysis and scrutiny as to how that can affect the lives of Guyanese. The waiver, the gas to shore, whatever it is else as a major project. And so we are degutting the legislation when we do not do, as the judge said, the EPA is not doing today. We are degutting it, taking out the guts and making it meaningless. And that is why the judge used some very strong words. It is submissive to Exxon and a whole set of things. So I really am proud of the judgment, and you're going to get lots more now. The Attorney General could go right ahead and appeal, but we now know, because they have lifted their skirt, showing us what they are, literally.
In the exercise of control freakism.
In the exercise of control freakism.
Mr. Khemraj Ramjattan, I want to thank you very much for appearing on Nation Watch and bringing clarity to a number of issues. I'm sure our viewing population and our friends in Canada, who will also be seeing this at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, will be better enlightened, better positioned to discuss these issues further and to make informed judgment, informed decisions, and understand that for Guyana to grow, the People's Progressive Party must go.
Okay, that's a nice one.
I want to thank our viewers for joining and staying with us throughout the duration of the program, and look forward to you joining us again next Sunday. Until then, God bless. Be good to yourselves.
Thank you very much.
As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve